Ooh, a women's leadership forum. Sounds interesting. Men and our role in the workplace. Wade Davis, feminist, former football player, inclusion consultant, and writer. A male feminist, inclusion consultant, speaking at a women's leadership forum. Oh, goody!
Good afternoon. Come on, give me some more energy than that. Good afternoon, right?
He's a low-energy individual.
It is a privilege to be in front of all of you today.
But is it a male privilege? Huh? My mom thinks I'm funny.
And thank you, Brian and Ewan from AppNexus and everyone for inviting me here. It's an honor, and all of you look amazing.
This is the look of a man expecting a thank you. Notice how it is not forthcoming.
But I want to start with something first. How many of you all have ever been asked to make the business case for diversity and inclusion? Right? You all have been asked that, or you've been told that you have to make this case for diversity and inclusion.
I am honestly curious, because I have no idea, but is it that common a thing for people in business to approach their superiors suggesting diversity and inclusion initiatives? But let's say it is, for the sake of argument. Why would it then be so unusual for a manager to put the challenge to the employee to prove the business case for it? Because any new initiative in a business can either be a benefit or a detriment, and you want to avoid detriments in business. Are people supposed to just take it on faith that diversity and inclusion initiatives are always a good idea?
Well, I want you all to rid yourself of that today. Now, we're here to talk about the male role in inclusion, but I want to start with that, right? Because what is the business case for diversity and inclusion really asking you? It's a tax.
A tax. Having an employee make a business case for a new initiative in a company is a tax. Go on.
It is a tax that women, folks of color, folks who are differently abled, LGBT folks have to actually pay in order to be allowed to be in someone else's space.
Asking for a business case to be made for a diversity and inclusion initiative in a business is a tax that must be paid by everyone except able-bodied, straight, white men. Well, what if it's an able-bodied, straight, white man who is making the suggestion? You know, someone who is being a good ally? Is it still a tax on all of the other people, then?
And there's a labor associated with trying to convince someone else who has a biased opinion of you that you have value.
Whoa. Hold on a second. Our speaker is transmogrifying concepts right before our eyes here. Making a business case for something, whether it's a diversity and inclusion initiative or producing a new version of the company's widget, is a cost-benefit analysis. It's about the hard numbers of necessary time and resources to make the thing happen, and the projected return on that investment. It's not a plea for personal affirmation, any further than being responsible for effectively and successfully making the case to your boss. I mean, if I suggest a plan for diversity and inclusion that's going to cost my company $1 million a year, but without any guaranteed return on that investment, is the rejection of such a plan thus a declaration of my company being racist, sexist, ableist, and homophobic? Because that's certainly what our speaker is making it sound like.
That's what the business case is really saying at bottom. Like, what is your value to my organization? Can you give me data on that? And then I'll let you in, right?
Okay, I'm not quite sure here. Is our speaker conflating a business proposal with a job interview? I'm confused.
Now, the business case is also saying, women, prove to me that everything that I believe about you is not true, and then I'll let you in this space.
Yes, making the case that a business idea has merit only affects women, and all managers having such cases made to them, managers who can never be women themselves, of course, are automatically prone to reject a good idea on the basis of the gender of the speaker. Got it. Also, our speaker says, this space. What space? What are you talking about?
It's also saying, women, prove to me that you're capable of making my business more profitable, and then I'll let you in this space.
Yes, that is exactly what a business case is. A case made of how your idea will improve the business's fortunes. And again, this space. What space?
That's what the business case is really asking at bottom.
Yes, but you are making it sound like an inherently denigrating dismissal of a person and not a request for proof of an idea's business merit.
Well, we're going to rid ourselves of the business case today. But I can tell some of you don't really believe me, right?
Right?
So let's compare the business case to the women's suffrage movement, right?
Right?
Comparing the concept of the business case to the women's suffrage movement. Comparing an ultimately successful social movement to the notion of a proof of concept. Now, I am fascinated to know how we're going to get from point A to point B on this one.
So back in the days when women didn't have the right to vote, they would say certain things about women, about why they didn't deserve the right to vote. They would say things like, well, women just don't have the desire to vote. In the business world, they say things like, women actually don't run businesses. They would also say things like, women will be corrupted by politics and chivalry will die out if you have the right to vote. In the business world, they say things like, women just are mentally strong enough to run businesses. Are you convinced yet?
No, and neither has our society been convinced of such over the long term, because women got the right to vote, and they can run businesses, and they can run for president, and they can sit on the Supreme Court. And we have laws that specifically prohibit the discrimination of people in the workplace on the basis of gender. So, why doesn't all of that make our speaker happy? Well, I have no idea.
They also say things like, women's place is in the home. That's why you don't want to vote.
Okay, who is they? And why are you speaking in the present tense if we're talking about women's suffrage?
What do they say in the corporate world right now? They say, well, at some point she's going to want to have a baby. That's why I'm not going to promote her. Doesn't those two things sound very, very similar?
Well, whoever is saying that is putting themselves in line for a civil rights lawsuit. So, by all means, name names. But if an employer happened to know that someone was pregnant and know that she was going to be taking time off to have the child and raise it, why would they promote her to a position they were just going to have to refill again in the near future? Can you make the business case for promoting a pregnant woman in such a circumstance?
Lastly, men would actually say that you're just too inferior for the right to actually vote.
Oh, so now we're talking about the past again? And not musing on the corporate America of today? This talk has more time jumping in it than Quantum Leap.
Oh boy. Or they would say things like, you want to work in the corporate space where you're too emotional, you're too irrational, right?
What the hell was that? It's like he was going to say something, but then his internal record skipped. Very, very weird.
So are you convinced yet that we have to rid ourselves of having to prove to anyone else that we have value?
All right. If that is the business case our speaker is making, that no one should have to prove their own value to an employer, I would be really curious to know our speaker's suggestions on how people should conduct themselves during job interviews.
But I think that James Baldwin said it best. I want to read this one perfectly for you all. He said, "One cannot defend oneself against somebody who's determined to prove to himself, not to you, that you are inferior. And he wants you to corroborate it." We've got to walk out of that nightmare. We've got to walk out of the nightmare of having to prove to someone else that we have value, that you have to have data or some analytics to prove that you deserve to be in this space.
So, an employer or a superior in a company should just listen and believe when someone appears out of nowhere and says that their idea is a good one, that they are right for the job. The entire notion of personal merit, of proving one's ability to accomplish a task or fill a role, all of that just needs to be done away with. Got it.
So let's rid ourselves today of the need to make the business case. And the next time someone asks you, what's the business case? Say, ask James Baldwin.
Yes, I can see it now. You approach your boss, who must obviously always be a straight white man, and propose a diversity and inclusion program to them. And they say, "Okay, what's the business case for this?" And then you say, "Ask James Baldwin." And then they say, "No, I'm asking you. You're the one making the pitch."
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
The next thing I want you all to do is rid yourself of the belief that it is only the job of women to fight for gender equality in the workplace. Men need to start showing up because you all have done everything that we asked of you.
They've all done everything we've asked them to. So, women are still beholden to men to make it in the world? Women cannot plan things out for themselves?
You got your mentors. You got your executive sponsors. You got your ERG groups. We've asked you to do so much to prove that you deserve to be in our space. Right?
Right?
Isn't that time over to rid ourselves of having to do all of this actual work?
Rid ourselves of doing all of this actual work. The work of proving yourself as an individual because merely being a woman should be proof enough? Is that what I am to understand here?
So what's the role of men? What's the role of men in all of this?
Well, given that we are about 5 minutes into an 11-minute speech called Men and Our Role in Workplace Inclusion, I am honestly dying to know.
The first role for men is to give up this idea that I'm a good guy, right?
Right?
How many times say, well, I'm a good guy. I'm not involved in the sexism that you all face. I'm a good guy. As if you women are handing out like scorecards saying, you got a 5, so you're done today, right?
Right?
Right. If a man considers himself to be a good guy, if he goes out of his way to placate women who are holding him to account, not on the basis of his actions, but merely on the basis of his being a man, he's obviously a liar, oblivious to the reality of his own inherent toxicity. You know, it's funny how our speaker thinks women et al. Do not need to do anything more to prove themselves because they've already done enough, yet men apparently can never do enough to prove their good intentions because, well, really, they are still just men.
Like, no, it's not like, well, I got a 7.5, so I'm good, right?
Right?
Because as long as we men think of ourselves as good guys, that's all that we think we have to do.
Oh, well, do tell us. What is it that guys have to do more of so that women no longer need to put forth the effort of gaining experience and personal merit? How can men better protect women from the trials and tribulations of the real world? You know, so that women can become more independent from men.
That's all that we think is that I'm done now. I'm a good guy. You said I was a good guy. I'm done now, right?
Right?
There's more work that we have to do. My good friend Michael Denzel Smith said, when your self-conception is centered on the idea of your own goodness, it prevents you from hearing any critique of your own ideology and behavior.
Well, that is very insightful of your friend. If you have sold yourself on the fact of your own infallibility, then contradictions or competing ideas can hardly be entertained. So, I wonder if our speaker's self-conception consists of a belief in his own inherent goodness. I wonder if he ever considers whether or not what he is saying could either be regressive, condescending, or at all incorrect.
Because how many times has a guy said, well, I'm not as bad as he is, but what are you actually doing to change this culture? What are you actually doing to change the culture?
Simply not being a bad guy isn't enough. You need to tell other men how to behave correctly, because you know you're inherently good and you need others to be good to change the culture. Except, like your own friend advised, if you think of yourself as inherently good, then that mentality walls you off from allowing for criticism and second guessing. So, yeah, I am still very confused.
Men have to understand that the corporate world was set up by men for men.
Yes, this is why all men succeed in the corporate world merely on the basis of being men. Men never need to work to prove themselves, and they're successful based solely on them having a penis. Unlike women, of course, who have not and will never succeed in the corporate world, and, unlike men, are the only ones who have to prove their value and merit to their employers. Got it.
Women did not create, as Brittany Cooper says, this zero-sum calculus that if women start to join the workforce, that men lose out. That's just not the case.
If women start to join the workforce. If. Now, rarely is it the case that I will use the current year as a counterpoint, but it is the current year and not 1917. Did the last 100 years of social progress just not happen in our speaker's mind?
The second thing we men have to do is we have to educate ourselves about what your lives in the corporate world are actually like.
Why? If you're looking for gender equality in the workplace, why should being a woman be at all a factor in how others view women in the workplace? You see, this is what I don't understand. In order to achieve gender equality, gender needs to become a non-issue, a non-consideration when assessing someone's value. What should be assessed is an individual's personal merit and skill, regardless of their gender. And yet, our speaker wants considerations of gender at the forefront of people's minds. Can he not see that he is arguing for the opposite of gender equality?
That when you take a parental leave, it's considered a luxury. But we have to know that you all are punished for that. That you all miss out on opportunities because someone actually believes that it's a luxury that you get to take time off.
Having a family is a choice. Adding responsibilities to your life outside of the workplace that ebbs away at your effectiveness in the workplace is not and should not be a burden that your employer and coworkers have to unreasonably bear on your behalf. Paid leave is a luxury. Getting paid to raise a family while not actually working at your job is a luxury. What are you talking about?
We men have to educate ourselves and do the work to understand what your lived experiences are really like.
No. I have my own life to live, thank you. I don't spend my time prying into the personal lives of each individual female coworker. I only care that they show up on time every day and do their jobs. The same thing that I expect of men. You know, gender equality.
We've got to understand that ideas like executive presence was created with a man in mind, so you all will never have the perfect executive presence. So we dock you and say, you know what? You don't have executive presence.
Executive presence. I honestly can't say that I have heard that term before. But then, I'm not really a part of the big corporate world. Which is funny, given that I am a man, and the corporate world was built by men, for men, so you'd think I would be the CEO of Microsoft already.
We as men have to educate ourselves to make sure that we are doing the work daily to understand what your lived experiences are like, so we can get rid of this idea that I'm a good guy.
Men need to stop seeing themselves as good guys. Men need to educate themselves on the lives of women so that men can understand how hopelessly and incurably wicked men really are. Got it.
Then we got to make it personal.
This time, it's personal.
We got to make it's got to live here. How many times have you heard some guy say, well, I had a baby, I had a daughter, and now I've become a gender justice advocate? That's benevolent sexism, right?
Right. When a man makes a proclamation that he is an advocate for gender justice, he's obviously being sexist. Because regardless of what they say or do, men are naturally sexist. Got it.
Oh, pat me on the back now. Actually, no. You should have been doing this anyway. You didn't need to have a daughter or have a wife. You should do this because you're human.
And since, by implication, men never do any of this as a matter of course, men are something less than human. And even when they do end up acting in a way that you prefer, it's still not good enough because, obviously, it is a false gesture, a facade of humanity. Because, they are still just men. Got it.
And you believe in fairness and justice. And you have to know that we as men benefit every day from a system that was set up for us to succeed.
Yes. No man has ever failed at anything, ever. Got it.
We have to start doing some work. We have to start doing a lot of work. It has got to be personal.
This time, it's personal.
Then we got to act, right?
Right.
Like we can't just talk about all these things. Like we have to actually act. We've got to understand that when we go out to work for drinks after work and there are no women there and we're talking about work, that we're intentionally not allowing you to be a part of the work that is done where people build networks and have certain types of connections.
That sounded a little jumbled there, but okay. So if after work men go out for drinks and there are no female coworkers there, then that is men prohibiting women from networking because networking only happens in bars after work hours? And of course, it's totally cool these days for men to ask their female coworkers out for drinks without there being a risk of a misunderstanding that ends up being a career-ending incident. Got it.
We've got to understand that there are consequences to our actions. And we say things like, well, I didn't intend to do that. Forget the intention. What about the impact? What about the impact that this has on your careers?
Yes. So why would a man take the risk of mixing alcohol with a working relationship with a female coworker? Are men not allowed to consider the longevity of their own careers?
We've got to understand that there is a lot of work to do, and we've got to move to action every single day.
Okay, isn't this a women's forum? I mean, I suppose there are some men in the audience, but why are we preaching about what men need to do to an audience of men's inherent victims? What does that accomplish, outside of our speaker's own virtue signaling? Oh, maybe I just answered my own question.
A friend of mine, Juan, said that men should be on one-day contracts for our feminism. And that means even men like me. That every day I have to sign a new contract that says, oh, you were good on Monday, but what are you going to do on Tuesday?
Daily feminism contracts for men. Got it.
You were great on Wednesday, but what are you doing to make the lives of individuals who don't have access to power and privilege today?
Access to power and privilege on the basis of what? Just being men? You know, that sounds a little bit sexist.
My feminism is on life support because I fall short too. I was asked to partner with our First Lady of New York City on an initiative for LGBT equality. And I got off the phone, and I was so excited, and I called up my team, and I was like, oh my God, the mayor's wife just called me. And she said, who? I said, the mayor's wife. She said, I'm gonna ask you again, who? I said, the First Lady of New York City, Charlene McQuarrie, right?
Right?
Even me should be on a one-day contract, right?
Right?
That every day I have got to be actively involved in educating myself to understand that your lives are very different from mine.
So, our speaker wants all of us to know that even he is suspect, that even his words and proclamations may be fueled by a faulty understanding of feminism. And with that admission, then, why should your audience believe anything that you have to say? I mean, all of your ideas are tainted from the get-go because, after all, you're just a man.
And that I am actively complicit if I'm not actually doing work to make the lives that you all have better.
So, what? Do you want a pat on the back?
Oh, pat me on the back now. Actually, no.
You should have been doing all of this from the beginning, you know, because it's the human thing to do. How can you imagine that anything you do now or in the future will ever be enough to pay penance for being, you know, a man?
I want to close with a quote by a friend of mine, Gloria Steinem. She says, it's about making the life more fair for women everywhere. It's not about rebuilding the existing pie. It's about making a new pie.
You just misquoted a woman. I guess you think you have the privilege of misrepresenting the words of women because you're a man. Isn't that right?
That's important because oftentimes we ask women to take on certain characteristics that were historically ascribed to men. That's not okay.
Like going out for drinks after work? Which is such a guy thing to do, we shouldn't expect women to follow suit, except by not doing so, men are preventing women from networking like they do which is wrong. Gosh, it's almost like anything that men do, it ends up being incorrect. Funny, that.
That's not okay. We should want you all to transform and rebuild this entire system.
So now it's women's job to do the work to rebuild the system. But I thought men had all the power and the responsibility to change the culture. I thought women should no longer be required to prove themselves. I'm still very confused.
And what inclusion really means is that you're valued, you're respected. You not just have a seat at the table, but you actually have power to make decisions when you're at that actual table. And you get to decide who's at the table too.
And of course, all without having to make the case that you deserve to be at that table. Because that would just be sexist.
Again, it is not about adding you all to the pie. It's about making an entirely new pie. Thank you so much.
Well, that was a jumbled mess of a speech. And so, what did we learn? Well, we learned that making a business case is really a tax. That women shouldn't have to demonstrate personal merit because the actions of women in the distant past provide a waiver of responsibility to all women of the present. We learned that everything men do is wrong, even and especially when they do the right thing, because they're always behaving in a sexist manner, even if it's benevolent. We also learned that women need to bake fresh pies. But obviously, my conclusions are faulty. My observations are skewed. My thoughts on and behavior towards women, all women, is toxic. Because I am a man, just like our speaker. As always, thank you for watching.